Without members, a book club is just a book. Join the community by following us on Facebook or sign up for exclusive content through our website, www.bookinterrupted.com/unpublished.
Parental guidance is recommended because this episode has mature topics and strong language. Here are some moments you can look forward to during this episode of Book Interrupted.
Brought up in Belfast in the 60s and 70s, and it was a pretty crap place to be brought up, really, because there was bombs going off, people getting shot, all sorts of things going on at the time. Went through the Middle East, drove across the Sahara Desert, ended up in Cape Town in the middle of apartheid.
I was like, how did he, on a motorbike, drive through the desert? That is serious.
It was
That is
pretty
a
nuts,
serious
yeah.
adventure.
Even though it's more difficult, it's much more rewarding to actually put yourself through those challenges and to come out the other side. Yeah,
They're not having a real adventure. They're having a safety net adventure.
Whereas if you're one guy standing at the border in Africa, driving across the desert on a road bike, I don't know if you know much about motorbikes, but it's just wrong. It's like going driving in a Ferrari. It's just not what you do, you know?
Yeah, it's an inspiration. It gives people hope. And maybe it'll even push some people into finally chasing their dreams.
At one stage, I think it was the south of Sudan, I actually drove off the edge of my map into Uganda. I had to find somebody coming the other way to swap maps around, you know? So you really are putting yourself through some sort of sadomasochistic experience.
To read a book is the goal. I wanna learn something new, and I don't wanna be disrupted. Mind, body, soul. Inspiration is the goal, and we're gonna talk it out on Book Interrupted.
Welcome to the Author's Spotlight. During these mini episodes, we have authors come on and tell us about their books and why we should read them. Let's listen. Welcome to Book Interrupted. During this Author's Spotlight, we're talking to Chris Donaldson in his book, Going the Wrong Way, and it's a memoir. Is that correct, Chris? A memoir?
That's right, yeah.
Yeah, so welcome to the show, Chris. Let us know why you think we should read your book.
Well, I suppose the main thing is it's got 1,300 five-star reviews on Amazon, which is pretty incredible at the minute, I think. We should get a prize for taking the longest time to write a book. It took me 40 years to write it in the end. But so to really start off at the beginning, I was brought up in Belfast in the 60s and 70s. And it was a pretty crap place to be brought up, really, because there was bombs going off, people getting shot, all sorts of things going on at the time. So it got to the stage of finishing education. Like a lot of Irish people, we want to get out of town and see the world. So I decided I want to go to Australia on a motorbike for some reason, which I can't quite work out yet. But it was really, motorbike was really just the means to the end to see the world and get to Australia. It was in November 79 I left. And I got as far as London, and the Ayatollah Khomeini took over the American embassy in Tehran, basically closed off Iran. So I couldn't go east. So I ended up going south just to get the heat, find the sun, went through the Middle East, drove across the Sahara Desert, ended up in Cape Town in the middle of apartheid. After various adventures, I got a job in a sailing yacht, then sailing back up to Europe, and got the bike shipped to the States, rode up to Canada and then down through the States, through Central America, ended up in Argentina. So about that time, I've been writing journals and started writing a manuscript. At that stage, when I got home, I was 23. Another guy wrote a book about riding a motorcycle around the world. And I thought, well, there's no point in me doing it now. There's no point in having two books about the same thing in my innocence. It was only after I realized his book was completely different, because he was a 45-year-old journalist, an author, writing a book about riding around the world, whereas I was just basically a student, and not a very good one either. So I parked out my manuscripts in the bottom drawer and forgot about it for 40 years. And then a couple other people started doing similar trips, Ian McGregor, people like that, writing books about it. So I thought, well, I got to get mine finished. So I ended up writing the book at the age of 62, 63. I'm now 66. That was really unique because I was able to read my journals and my manuscript that I'd written 40 years before and have a laugh at myself. So I was able to put sort of my years of experience on top of the perspective of the young guy. So it's written as a viewpoint of a 21-year-old, but with my wealth of experience in life, this university since then. So yeah, it was quite an incredible journey to write the book, going from my old journals and photographs and notes and stuff that I'd made It was really nearly as if I was reading a story about somebody else, not myself at all. Quite nice to know too that even though a lot of the stories were 40 years old and I hadn't thought about it for many years, I was amazed how much came back to my brain. It's obviously fogged with 40 years of too much alcohol and that sort of thing. It was very emotional sometimes to actually be able to look at the photographs and remember what was happening and notes to go off as well. So it is quite a unique book, I think, from that perspective.
I don't know if this is a spoiler, but I'm going to ask it. And if you don't want to reveal, that is perfectly okay. So did you make it to Australia on that trip or no?
Well,
Or
I
is that
may
a
as well
spoiler?
say I didn't make it on that trip, no. Which is
No,
the whole
no.
idea of it. It's a bit of a giveaway in the title, going the wrong way, because I ended up in Argentina instead of Australia. You can't go further wrong than that. Because I went a journey that I hadn't prepared for at all. The journey I prepared for was finished, so I had to go to Africa without any notion what was in Africa, how I was going to cross borders. I mean, driving across the desert on a road bike. I don't know if you know much about motorbikes, but it's just the wrong. It's like going desert driving in a Ferrari. It's just not what you do, you know.
I know
So
I was
it's
thinking
like,
when you said you drove through the Sahara because I'm in Senegal. I was like, how did he on a motorbike drive through the desert? That is serious.
it
That
was
is
pretty
a
nuts.
serious
Yeah.
adventure.
Traveling in a convoy, but some days we would have covered maybe 10 miles after pushing, digging, and shoving the whole way. Still only covered 10 miles. So it was pretty hard going. And then through the rest of Sudan was pretty grim as well. There's maybe 600 miles between petrol stations. So you'd have to carry all the petrol to cover you for 600 miles down a dirt road. So I wouldn't like to do it again, but in fact it is. Another spoiler. Whenever I'd published the book, one of my mates said, well, you never actually got to Australia. Why don't you have another go? So I still had the original motorbike in the garage. So pulled it out, parted it up a bit, and the trip was set off for Australia 2 years ago, just after COVID.
Did you? That was amazing.
So I finally made it on the same motorbike 40 years later. Finally got to Australia, which I left in 79. So it's a bit of a record breaker, slow trip as well.
But you got there. That's amazing.
Yeah,
That's
I got
great.
there
I
in the
love
end.
that. I was wondering about the motorbike because when it said Belfast to Australia, I was like, how is he going to get the motorbike over the ocean? But I guess you ship it. You
You
would
have to
just
ship
ship
it,
it.
yeah.
And
Well, Myanmar's been closed off for years and years, so basically you have to ship from India to Australia. So it's, as you say, there's too much sea to ride a motorbike around the world. You can sail around the world, you can fly around it, but you can't actually drive. You can actually go up
no.
and down it much easier. You know, you can go from Belfast to Cape Town, from Canada to South America, but that's a different story. And whenever I started writing the book, I realized it wasn't just a geographical going the wrong way. It was actually the story of my life. Very often I've taken the road less traveled is probably a more popular term for taking the road that everybody sort of avoids. And the reason they avoid that is because it's a more difficult life challenge to travel with. But what I want to tell in the book was that even though it's more difficult, it's much more rewarding to actually put yourself through those challenges and to come out the other side. So it's a bit of a philosophical coming of age story as well.
No, I would agree with that 100%. The greatest adventures are the ones that people usually say, why would you do that?
Yeah.
What if you don't like it? What if you let this happen? And he's like, well, what if it doesn't? What if I have this amazing adventure in my life?
Yeah.
And then
Well,
I
I mean,
don't have any
you can
regrets.
fly from Belfast to Australia without any hardship at all, you know. So you really are
Yeah.
putting yourself through some sort of sadomasochistic experience. First, going the wrong way, but it's a bit of a coming of age story. Left when I was 21 and putting myself against all the challenges that I could find, basically. And reading about it when you're 65, I'm at the end of the working environment, if you like, sort of retiring now. So it's a different perspective altogether. Probably just as challenging a time going into retirement rather than going into
Just the
sort of coming of
opposite.
age. Yeah.
Yeah. I think also, in my experience, it's easier to make that jump when you're young because you don't really think about the consequences as much.
Yeah, you don't think about the consequences. You think you can't be stopped. You think you're invincible at that stage when you're 21. It's only when you get to 60 you realize, oh, I shouldn't do that. I shouldn't do that. And my next book will be entering into that, really, about why older people nearly lose the will to live. They stop when they retire, especially men. They've identified themselves with their work for 40 years, and all of a sudden, overnight, they stop work, sit in the garden and play golf. So this is a big life change. But that's the next book. I have to wait another 40 years for that one.
I like that that's what you did when you were in retirement age. You went back and looked at this amazing adventure and then reflected with the person you've become, which is basically this adventure molded you into.
Yeah.
And how it affected who you are. And I think that's really amazing.
Yeah,
actually.
I mean, I've been through some fairly dodgy times with business-wise. I worked as an entrepreneur. I've had arguments with the banks. A lot of people had, but it's always given me confidence that I'm standing in front of a judge in a position of fighting for my business. I just think, well, this is maybe difficult, but it's not as difficult as driving across the Sahara Desert. So it's always given me the confidence to be able to go back at.
Yeah, it makes you definitely have more endurance for life. For
And
sure.
funny enough, reading some of my reviews, they've been quite touching. That one guy said his son was having spinal surgery and going through a lot of pain, a lot of trouble. It's about 20 different operations on it at this stage. And he wrote to me to say he was able to read my book to his son, helped him give him the ability to hang on there, to go another mile, to go through another operation. So it's quite touching that some of the reviews have come to that sort of opinion as well. So it's been nice.
Yeah, it's an inspiration. It gives people hope. And maybe it'll even push some people into finally chasing their dreams.
Yeah, well, that's the idea in a way, because people got so health and safety conscious these days and risk adverse. They'd rather watch it on TV than actually go out there and do it. And as I say, if I can ride a motorbike at 21 with no experience of travel, not even knowing it. I mean, at one stage, I think it was the south of Sudan, I actually drove off the edge of my map into Uganda. I had to find somebody coming the other way to swap maps around, before GPS, obviously, before the internet. So everything was much more, you'll find out when you get there.
Yeah. What you said is true. I think that people sitting home and watching characters having experiences on TV, or actual people having experience on TV and not having any experiences of themselves, leads to people kind of being depressed and not.
Yeah, you're watching an adventure program like Top Gear. I've driven a car to, I don't know if you have it in Canada, I've driven cars to the Arctic Circle and across the deserts and so on. I went down to Argentina a few years ago and they got into trouble with the local police and stuff. But it's only when you read about it, they actually had 3 of them on the camera, but there's about 50 of a backup looking after them, their money, their health, their security and everything else, which is, although they're going down the same road, it's a different road. If you're on your own and you've only got so much limited resources, it's a very different experience.
I know my husband actually is always saying that when I'm watching something. I'm like, can you believe this? He's like, who's videotaping that? I was like, oh, exactly. Right. I'm not alone. Someone is there with a mic and a camera, and maybe there's a crew. And if something really bad happened, they're okay.
Yeah,
they're not having a real adventure. They're having a safety net adventure.
Whereas if you're one guy standing at the border in Africa with you against the rest of the world, you've got yourself into the situation now. You've got to get yourself out of it. It's nobody else to back you up.
Yeah, totally. And I read on your website, you got trapped in Syria, Jordan, and Israel. Is that right? How did that happen?
Well, in my innocence, we took a boat to Israel because there'd been a ceasefire with Egypt and Jordan at that stage, thinking we could just drive to Egypt, but they wouldn't let us out over the border because there's still trenches across the road. So the ceasefire had been signed, but hadn't practically implemented it yet. So I had to go back to Cyprus over to Syria, which wasn't much better than it is now, and through Jordan. So it was sort of a bit of a roundabout tour of the Middle East as well.
Wow. It's amazing. Yeah, a lot of people are watching these kind of shows. It's just making me think, if they read your book, they're going to see what a real, they can visualize what you're going through because it's actually a real experience rather than, I feel like we filter things so much, like everything now, even camera filters, like everything's so.
I used to say the camera never lies, but the camera does lie now. Even movies lie because they can put AI into it. But yeah, and certainly the whole book writing experience was great because I was self-published the book. I got a couple of editors to go through it. I got edited after I'd written it. And then I'd have a row with the editor because they wanted to take some pieces out of it. I said, you can't do that because that's what makes a story, even though it's maybe not quite as polished that you would like fully edited book to read. Mine's much more, it's a bit of raw, as a 21-year-old would see the world rather than as a 60-year-old or a 50-year-old editor sitting in an office in London would see it. So I think it's been quite a refreshing blast of interest. Certainly the reviews are backing that up anyway.
I love that. So how long did you do the adventure for before you came back home?
About a year and a half.
Year and a half.
And in those days, I mean, remember, if you wanted to phone home from Africa somewhere, from Egypt, for instance, you had to book your call the day before. It costs about £5 or about $50 now to make a 5-minute call home, Whereas when I drove to Australia last year, you've got your mobile, you've got WhatsApp, you can phone home at any time you want. Your GPS show you where to go. You can Google the town next time to see where the next hotel is going to be. And I think the journey I made is probably one of the last before the last sort of more to tune with the old Victorian explorers, if you like, who disappeared for months at a time. Nobody knew where they were. Whereas now everybody knows where everybody is. You know, my wife was able to, child was able to, an application on the phone. And they actually see me driving across Iran, you know. So they actually, it's just amazing that what has actually happened in the last 30, 40 years.
I remember, same thing. We used to call relatives, and I remember my grandparents, whenever I called them, they'd be like, "You got to get off the phone. It's going to go over this certain time amount," and then they'll charge us extra. We'd be like, "Okay, I love you, bye." And then I remember when we went to China, me and my husband went to China about 15 years ago now, and they had just started with the smartphones, and I had my first iPhone, and it was the first iPhone. It was like tiny. I remember I got lost, and he's like, "No problem. There's this thing. I can go on my computer and it says, 'Where's my phone?' and I can find you," because I was trying to like look at a map. I'm like, "I'm completely lost in Shanghai. I don't know where I am." He's like, "I'm looking on here." And I remember thinking, this is going to change the whole world. You can find me just because I'm talking to you on my phone. Totally different. And I used to be on the road sales rep when I was younger, and the map books I had in my car marking off all my accounts. Totally different now. I just like type in an address and off I go.
I think in those days, by navigating yourself, you've built up a sense of direction. You know, you drive in a city and you think, well, I think it's up that way, but it might be, might not be. But you think it's that way, and very often you're not far wrong. Nobody ever has to do that anymore. You're just going somewhere, you just log it into your GPS. And sometimes you think, how did I actually get here? You can't actually remember the road you took because you're just following that nice lady telling you to turn left, turn right.
Completely. When I go to Canada, like I've even told people directions saying, "Oh, if you go north," and they're like, "Which way's north?" They don't even know what direction north, south, east, or west is, where they're standing. Yeah. And I think that's because the GPS, people don't have to think about that anymore. So that's not something that their memory or their mind has to calculate.
Level of navigating, which is not in your brain anymore. You just do what you're told. But so yeah, there's that to it as well. But there's so many other things have changed with the internet, as I say, nobody goes to a restaurant now without checking the reviews for it, that sort of thing. Just simple as that. Nobody goes anywhere without checking, without making sure it's the right place and getting the best value, whatever. You know, sometimes it's nice just to go, to say, the road less traveled or the wrong way. And writing the book, I did realize that whether I would have done or not, but various periods in my life, I have picked a harder route to go down just for the fun of it.
Well, I think it builds character too. And I was reading something somewhere that said purposely taking a different route can lead you to, it can literally change your life.
Yeah.
Just going a different route. You know, you can run into someone, meet someone, find a place. Like things change if you try something different, but because you're so programmed just to like follow what the technology says, that you never do. So you never have any new experiences. You just are like making your bubble smaller and smaller and smaller.
Yeah, I mean, there's a reaction against people don't like having too much of an adventure. They don't like the uncertainty of things. They want to have everything planned. And certainly the guy, when I went away 2 years ago, there's two of us. The guy whose idea it was for me to go to Australia this time, he got halfway there, got to Israel, and he decided to come home because he thought it's not worth the risk, not worth the adventure. And he's probably right. You know,
you're more
what do you gain from riding your motorbike to Australia? Really, it's a stupid thing to do, you know, because it's a fly there, you can take a bus, a train, whatever. It's probably the stupidest thing you can do. But again, the most rewarding as well, because if you're on a motorbike, it's very easy for people to come over and talk to you. If you drive into a small town, so you get much better reaction than when you're on your own. You're there. You don't have to wind down the window to speak to people. You're just there, and it's an immediate contact with them. But yeah, it's not the smartest thing to do.
But it's a great story.
Well, I read somewhere that the best story is something goes wrong very early on in the trip, and they spend the next reading the book. The author's trying to get his way out of these situations. So there's certainly a lot of situations I ended up having difficulty getting out of.
I know you're here to write it, so it worked out.
Well, exactly. That's the secret plot of the story is I didn't die. I made it.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, well, that's all we have time for during this mini episode. Readers, if you'd like to pick up this book, it's called Going the Wrong Way, and it's Chris Donaldson's book where he tried to go from Belfast to Australia. You can find it on our website at www.bookinterrupted.com/shop, and we have a section called Author Spotlight, and you can find his book there. You can also find a link to his website and his book on our show notes below.
Yeah, I guess that's it.
Yeah, it's
Thank you
also
so
an
much for coming on.
audiobook. I don't know if you guys approve of audiobooks, do you?
Oh, no, yeah, audiobooks for sure. It's in an audiobook.
Yeah, it's an audiobook as well, yeah.
Perfect. No, all of us. Actually, there's only one member on Book Interrupted that's held out and has never listened to an audiobook. I'm a big audiobook person. I'm constantly reading an actual book and listening to an audiobook at all times. That's all I ever do.
And is audiobook also available on Amazon or just
It's on
your
Amazon
website?
as well, yeah. It's in hardback, paperback, ebook, and audiobook on Amazon.
Great. Yeah. So we'll put the link for the Amazon page on our website and you can listen, read, scroll Chris's book. Wonderful.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Book Interrupted. If you'd like to see the video highlights from this episode, please go to our YouTube channel, Book Interrupted. You can also find our videos on www.bookinterrupted.com.
Have a listen to our off-the-shelf episodes. These are the silly, fun, and weird, wonderful things we do when we get off cue. So, listen to our off-the-shelf episodes to hear more and more from us, the Book Interrupted crew. I think you'll love it, and I know you'll laugh.
Book Interrupted.
Never forget, every child matters.